Welcome back to the Pathmakers podcast. I'm really excited about this episode. We have an amazing guest today. We have Anfernee Chansamooth. Welcome.
Good to be here, Edwin. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, thank you for coming on. Now, for people who don't know, who is Anfernee?
Who is Anthony? Oh, tough question. Basically, I'm a marketing consultant, a fractional chief marketing officer or a CMO, and a content creator with over a decade of professional B2B marketing experience. I have my own business called Authentic Marketer and my own brand. And I'm also at the moment I'm working part time for an agency, 3 to 4 days a week as their growth marketer. So that's who I am professionally, and then personally, I love to travel. I'm married. We just hit our sort of 6 year anniversary, and for the
Congratulations.
last thank you. And I've just come back to Sydney like a few weeks ago after 1 year living in Vietnam with my wife in Da Nang. And so it's been quite an adventure.
Wow. Okay, that's like a lot. Sounds like you've lived like a pretty exciting life. Like I read like in your bio like 28 countries. Like that's a lot in and of itself. And one thing I want to touch on real quick, have looking at like some of your past stuff, it seems like you were actually in the workforce up until like 2009, correct?
Yeah, so when I graduated university, I had a Bachelor of Business degree, and then I actually ended up working in corporate for all the way up to 2005. End of 2005, I had a brain surgery, which kind of changed the trajectory of my career. And then I actually left, or I ended up moving to Canada as a result of that.
Oh my god.
Negotiated, with my boss at the time, or my new boss at the time, to go and work from Canada. So I was technically remote working before it became a thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then that a few years later, the global financial crisis happened, lost my
Mm.
job, and then
Oh.
that kind of launched my, I guess, pathway into entrepreneurship. So, and that started off with basically me sitting on my couch at the time with my roommate saying, "What do I do now? I don't have a job, but I've got this visa and I don't want to go back to Australia yet. I'm enjoying Canada." And she said, "Well, you've been teaching salsa dancing, at the church every Thursday night as a volunteer. Why don't you do that from our living room? We'll clear all the furniture and then you just invite people." And I said, "Oh, that's a crazy idea." And so I went onto a website called meetup.com, which is a new website at the time, right?
Yeah.
2009. And within 2 weeks, I had 200 members. And then basically, put up a post saying, "We've got the first event coming up. It's going to be at this address." I didn't tell them it was my house. And then, people came in. I dropped my hat and said, "Look, just pay me whatever you want. I'll teach you for an hour and then we'll have some fun." And that became my first official hustle. And did that, that led to me getting invited to go and teach salsa at corporations in their offices, because some of my students were like, "Hey, can you come and do that at our office?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so every week I was teaching somewhere around Toronto.
Oh my
And
god.
then, yeah, and whilst I was doing that at night time, during the daytime, I was volunteering as a social media sort of marketer. I was learning, things like Facebook and Twitter, and learning how to use these tools to build an audience, and to put out engaging posts, and the kind of things that we do now, naturally. But back then, I had to learn that skill, and that led me down the path of digital marketing.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, did you just jump into digital marketing? Seems like salsa dancing was, kind of like your gateway into entrepreneurship. What happened? Do you still dance, by the way? Like,
I don't dance at all. So here's a lesson about taking a hobby or passion and turning it into a business, right? So after doing that for about a year, it actually killed my desire to dance anymore. Like, actually,
oh,
because it became my job, and then I just did not enjoy the process of going out there and dancing. because I associated it to being work and making money. And so that's why I don't necessarily agree with this message out there that, hey, you should find your passion and then you should turn that, like that's the thing that you should make money from. I actually think that's terrible like advice. And in many situations, you probably don't want to turn that into a career or a business, and just leave that be your passion and leave it be the thing that you enjoy after you do your work, right? Like that was my lesson. So I'm scarred and no, Edwin, I don't dance anymore. And my wife hated because when we got married and she's like, how come you used to teach salsa and all this stuff and how come you never dance salsa with me? And I'm like, it's trauma. Like it's honestly, it's not you, but it brings up all kinds of stuff for me. And, I'm working on it. All right. I'm working on it. So, yeah. So it wasn't
I
the
mean,
salsa
that's
that took me into digital marketing. So it was more at the time I was already when I was working for the corporate. I was already in my role. I was helping them with their website, the intranet, the internal website, and then one of the projects they actually got me to work on or asked me to be involved in was a reward and recognition system for the department I was in, right? And so that involved actually coming up with a system and a tool, but also actually going around and interviewing like the managers and the team members and whatever it was, and basically getting these internal case studies that we could put on the internet, and share that around. So that was internal marketing. So it's basically like how do we build a culture, right? With understanding who's in the room and how like what is the benefit of working here and who are the star players or whatever you want to call that. And what I really learned from that experience was everybody has a story and everyone has value, and it's all about helping them really connect to that and be able to share it because not everyone can share their stories really well, right? So it's about
Mhm.
learning how to do that really well, and that kind of led me into this naturally into social media. So obviously I was using Facebook just to connect with friends and family, but then I saw, you can then read articles online and you can do all these other things and share videos and whatever it may be. And I've always been fascinated by what is it that captures our attention, and so that's one thing that I've been interested in. Another thing I've been interested in is how to become successful. Like, why do certain people seem to get all the opportunities, seem to get all the money and all the success and whatever it might be? And particularly me being from an immigrant background, because my parents came to Australia, after they left the war in Laos, back in 1978. We came to Australia. I was a refugee for 6 months, and then we came to Sydney. Um, that's a whole other challenge. It's like if you're not from the place, right? How do you develop opportunities and how do you build wealth and how do you build free security for your family and those kind of things. So those two areas, right? Like how do you become successful, and then also how do you tell good stories, and why do we get attracted to good stories? They've always been part of just me, as something that I've been very fascinated by.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of like touched like a couple points there, right? Good stories and attention. Like that's something I think a lot of us are realizing now. Like especially after COVID hit and we lockdown happened, and the only like it seems like our phones and social media become such a big thing, and like we see like a lot of attention just like spike. But then where that attention is being focused really matters, and I feel like a lot of people don't seem to realize that. And obviously you have like where kind of like attention goes, opportunity also goes, and like success to some degree as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been there's two sides of that coin, right? One is what you've just said is yes, where attention goes, opportunity kind of flows there as well. On the flip side, there's all these things like fake news, and there's people can manipulate the or game the systems or the platforms, whatever it may be, to put up things like these crappy courses that don't have any real value, but they're selling them for tens of thousands of dollars and ripping people off. And we can just even look back to the whole FTX, the whole crypto thing that's
Oh
been
my
going on for the
gosh.
last 10 years, and most of that has been scams. Like most of it has been, um, something that sounded really cool. Oh, there's this new game-changing technology that's going to replace our financial system, but it hasn't become
Right.
that, and is yet to become that. So, um, but why did that work? And the whole, even the do you know much about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried?
I mean, not a whole lot because, like, to be honest, kind of like with the scams thing, like after, like, like a couple years ago with the crypto, like a bunch of rug pulls. Like, thankfully, I wasn't affected, but like,
Yeah.
just hearing about that, I'm like, well, I'm just not going to touch this thing anymore. And like when FTX came down, like I was more of like a stand, like a bystander looking at like, and I'm like, okay, this, I feel like was going to happen at some point because it seemed interesting from the outside. I don't know. You probably have more idea on like what was going on there, though.
Yeah, like, I can't speak to the whole technological side of it because that's one argument is this is a whole groundbreaking technology, Um, but I can speak to the human side of it, which is manipulators manipulating a narrative and putting out a story. And the reason why SPF, because it baffles a lot of people, and myself included, is like, why did all these investment funds and all these people who are very smart, intelligent people, right, decide that this company or this person who's running this company is worth investing in, right? And they literally even bypass some of their own rules in investment. So normally, if they were looking at a startup or a company to invest in, they have guidelines that they follow and say, okay, here's 20 things that the company, the startup must adhere to in order for us to even like consider them for investment. When it came to FTX, they kind of ignored all of that and just went, well, he looks like a genius, so let's give him money, right? And so, like who comes to a board meeting on Zoom, in their board shorts and is playing a game at the same time? Like this guy must be really crazy, and it's all really a lesson in storytelling. It's all in a negative way, right? But
Mhm.
one cannot argue that he was a genius at doing it, and was able to pull the rug over a lot of people and a lot of influential people, the media included. And there's other stories like that. I mean, he's just one example, right?
Right.
But let's
Kind
bring
of
it
like,
back to where I just it can be good.
I
It
mean,
can be used good or bad. Just depends.
right. I think like now that I think about it, I mean, you have like Sam Bankman-Fried. Like, I'll just touch on that one last thing. Like Sam Bankman-Fried, and like I'm starting to forget now, but like a couple years ago, there's like that one woman who had like the biotech startup of like one drop of blood,
Yeah,
a lot of
Elizabeth.
like,
What's her name? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but yeah, like there was like that. There was like a lot of tension. It looked like super promising, and then like obviously it was not very promising now. But like as to your point, right? They could be like good attention. Like there's like that stuff, which is very bad. And you know, in your opinion, as someone who's kind of like done this for a while, is there a way to like regulate that, or is it kind of just a randomness thing? Like that's on Meta side and Instagram side and those content like sides.
So, so we're talking about well, you're talking about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. So that's the woman that you're referring to. Um, the question around can it be regulated? I think that's very problematic to do that, mainly because a lot of these platforms, like a Meta, and an X or a Twitter or whatever, their economies are greater than like much greater than a lot of the countries out here that we live in. They generate so much revenue and income and profit, and governments don't really understand the technologies. They don't understand the way that these platforms or these corporations are manipulating attention. Like they don't understand algorithms. They don't read the code. They can't get it. And so it's very difficult. I think what we can do from an individual level is you know introduce our own filters to that, right? And set our own guidelines and rules and boundaries around that. Now, it's very hard because you're literally battling an algorithm or a device, sorry, a software platform that's designed to pull your attention and keep you bringing it back, right? So one of the most genius moves, there's this documentary on Netflix about this. You guys can check it out. But the one of the most like remarkable and scary moves that ever was product ever developed was the scrollless, the endless scroll. right? Because if we go back to the beginning of Facebook when it first started, it didn't have that. So when you were using it, it would literally have buttons on the bottom of the page where you click to the next page and click to the next profile, right? They removed that, so then you could just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. So now you're hooked, right? So the way the actual app is designed is to keep you there, right? And whilst that's happening, the algorithm is designed to feed you things, right, based on your own consumption, but also like you're being manipulated, right? And it's you probably heard the saying, Edwin, which is, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and so that's the reality of what the world that we're in right now, right? With a lot of these tools. So what we can do as individuals is to say, well, I'm going to limit. There are apps that can block access to some of these tools. You might set a limit. I'm only going to use it for 30 minutes a day or whatever, 1 hour a day. I've got one of those plugins for Chrome for my inbox, right? Which basically I define, I'm only going to look at email for 1 hour a day between this time and this time. Anything else, don't show me the inbox. Because I know for me, it's very easy to get sucked in there. So if I'm in the inbox and I see, open emails and it's notifications, I'm going to go and try and click through all of those things because I want to clear it. But that for 90% of the time, it's just a waste of time. Like it's not really helpful in any way. It's not changing my life. I'm not like a lot of it's spam. You know,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's the world we're in.
That's true. That's true. I guess like I do want to like shift perspective here because I have like a massive list of questions. I won't get through all of them, but there's like a lot of like you're a very interesting person. I'll say that. Like I have a lot of like stuff that I would love to get like kind of like your input on at least. But yeah, well I'll shift away from that topic. One thing. So here's something I'm very curious about. I read about it online, but fractional CMO. That's kind of like a
Mhm.
new term I've never heard of before I saw like your profile. Like what exactly is a fractional CMO?
Right. So traditionally, in the sort of larger companies, we have what's called the executive suite or the exec level, or the C suite, right? Which is all the directors, right, in the company. So you would have a director of marketing, a director of sales, director of HR, whatever it may be. And then you'd have your CEO, which is the person kind of running everything, right? Now, what's happening now in our current economy is because we're in this state of, you know, recession, almost recession, depending what country you're in.
Yeah.
But it's widely understood that we are going through a depressed economic time post pandemic. But economic theory, I'm not going to go into all of that, but it's not only because the pandemic happened, it's because some of the systems that we've had in place are breaking, right? Our financial systems are breaking. Like, isn't it interesting that this whole crypto Bitcoin thing came to be at the time when the pandemic came to be? And like, it's just a whole different factors are affecting this. So fractional is basically the whole idea behind fractional is, well, typically if you're a startup and you're a small business and you want to hire a head of marketing, that can cost you in Australia. I don't know what it is in the US, but in Australia, it's anything from $80,000 all the way through to $300,000 per year salary, right? Depending on their experience in the industry, how long they've been doing it, what skills they bring to the company, right? If you're a startup and you just need marketing expertise to help you grow the business, and you probably don't have that kind of money, right, to put down. That's a very hefty investment, right? So what a fractional is, you may have heard of it before in the last few years, referred to as a virtual CMO. So basically someone who doesn't come to your office and sits in a room with you, but they're somewhere else and they can give you guidance and they can be part of the team. Fractional is just taking that idea and saying, well, instead of having that virtual person full time, why don't you have them, on a per day basis or on a short basis every single week, and you pay a fraction of what you would normally pay them if you had them full time, right? So it becomes more economically viable for the business and the business owner, and at the same time, there are a lot of benefits coming from working with someone in that way, right? So you can access this expertise and this skill set without having to have them on staff, full time, basically. And that's what a fractional does. And I'm in the marketing world, so I'm the CMO of fractional. But this is also happening in other areas. There's fractional HR, there's fractional sales exec, there's fractional CTO. So you can actually have someone who's your head of technology, who only works with you 1 day a week, for example.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know there could be like other. I guess yeah. The next thing is like the fraction for other like executive suites. One thing I kind of am curious of, how does being a CMO differ from like a freelancer? Is it, like more ownership of what you're doing, or is
Correct.
it something else?
Yeah. So the difference between like just a freelance marketer. And I started doing that a few years ago, was just essentially being a copywriter. So when I left my last role, I worked full time as the head of marketing for a co-working space here in Sydney. Did that for 2 years, and then I left and started as a freelance content writer. Right, so I just basically went from that into copywriting, and then I was doing landing pages and sales pages and emails and all these other things. So I was freelancing for a while. Then I ended up building a team. So I had a content team. So I went from one person to now I've got 6 writers and 2 editors, and I've got a VA. And
Cool.
that became more of an agency type model. And then that, it really didn't. It was going all right for a while, but then when the pandemic hit, we lost a couple of major clients, and then I had to basically let people like dial that back down to okay, it's just me now. Uh, and then what happened was in 2022, I burnt out after 7 years of trying to run my own business or businesses. And then I took a break and I was looking at what's happening in the market and the industry. And that's when I actually learned about this fractional concept. And I realized one thing that's been consistent with me as a freelancer or running that agency was that the businesses that were hiring me and the clients that I was working with, they wanted content, but one thing they were really challenged with was how to use that content, right? So they would say, okay, we'll hire to write, you can write, 10 or 20 blog posts or whatever it may be, or social media posts and these kind of things. And then they would come back to me 6 months later and say, that's all great that you've done all this, but we're not getting results, right? Like we're not getting leads. We're not getting, the content isn't bringing us the things that we thought it might get us, right? The content's great, but it's not doing the thing that it should be doing. Then I realized, then I said to them, well, do you have a strategy? And they go, what's a strategy? And I said, okay, well, that's, or, not really. It's okay, well, that's your problem, right? Because you can't just create content and hope that it works. Like you actually have to have an idea of how to use that content to drive acquisition, okay? And so that kind of thinking, that's strategic thinking. That's the kind of thinking that you would hire a head of marketing to do, right? There's a difference between the head of marketing and the person down at the actual execution level, which is actually writing all the content, right? They're two different people usually in an organization. So that's where I then shifted into that more of that role, becoming the consultant and the advisor to the clients rather than being the person doing the content, right? And well, initially I did both, but then I realized, oh, actually I could just hire other people to write the content, and then I would actually elevate to the role of strategic thinking. And that's the difference. So you're paying for someone who actually now is accountable to the plan that they set, and then all success is based on how good is the strategy and how well it's implemented. Right. So I'm getting paid to come up with a strategy in tandem with the CEO, and also to actually drive the team to execute and make sure that everything's working, and then reporting back on a regular basis to the founder or the CEO to let them know how everything's going, and do we need to adjust, and where should we put their marketing budgets and these kind of things. So now you're thinking a lot more at that level rather than just, oh, what's the next blog post I'm going to write, right? It's very, very different levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like much like higher level thinking, where like driving strategy versus yeah, like you mentioned, like not just like what the next blog post is, like what are we trying to achieve with these blog posts?
Yeah, and
That's
then
that's
you
kind of
have
like the
to,
main.
yeah, and you have to explain how do you get there, right? It's not just like here's the goal, but what are the steps to get there, and what's it going to cost, right? And you're going to budget that in, and then you're going to go, okay, how are we going to measure and track all these things? right? So that's a lot more. And this is something my advice to anyone who's currently thinking about becoming a freelance writer, for example, or a freelance content writer or a freelance copywriter. If you want to make more money, you need to then change how the function that you perform for your clients. If you're just the person that produces the content, right, you're at risk because right now what's happening, and this is one of the reasons why I switched as well, is because when AI became really big and ChatGPT was launched, I knew my role as a content writer or copywriter was like going to be commoditized, right? So I knew that the clients would see these tools, they'll start playing with them, and then it's very hard to argue, hey, like, 10 years, like 7 years ago, when I first saw the first, two or three tools that was doing this, they were terrible. Like you could tell, like this was a machine writing it, and like nothing made sense, and it just was terrible. But when ChatGPT came out, and the world could see, oh, actually, this is pretty good. Like actually, when tools like Jasper AI and Copy, whatever these tools are, the quality that they put out is really, really compelling. Okay. Now I'm going to argue that you still need a human to edit and review and vet what comes out of it, because a lot of those tech tools are giving you what they call hallucinations, right? So they're making up a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
things. And so you need a human to actually review that stuff and make sure, hey, like if it's quoting something or putting some numbers or statistics in here and dates, let's just check those things are accurate, because a lot of times they're not, right? Yeah, back to the fractional CMO, there's a difference between, just someone who can, perform a function in the company, and then someone who's actually leading and driving that function.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like in the long span of things, like there's a couple questions I want to ask. Like, so with here's one thing I guess like I think I struggle with. I think a lot of other people struggle with. Right? Like you mentioned, like up and coming freelancers, like they probably need to like elevate their kind of thinking, or like so they don't get replaced by AI. But in a fractional CMO where you have like ownership and such, how do you handle managing like multiple clients at once? Because you have like more ownership, so that seems like more responsibilities. So is there kind of like a way you balance that in like your work life, or is it just is it, or am I thinking about it too deeply?
No, it's a great question, and it's actually, to be frank, it's challenging because you have to switch your brain to go, okay, what client am I working on today? Um, One thing I've done that's worked well is to focus on a specific industry. So I'm not having to then manage between, today I'm working in the accounting industry, and tomorrow I'm in healthcare, and the next day I'm working on fast food, because that would really like blow your mind, and you'll have like psychotic disorders and all kinds of things, right? It, so typically the way to get into fractional is you start, and like I said, I started off by doing B2B writing. So I would work only with professional services, right? So I had maybe one or two e-commerce clients at the time, but I really didn't focus my energy there because I wanted to become a specialist in one area, and business to business, particularly professional services. I'm talking about accountants, I'm talking about financial advisors, virtual assistant type companies. So basically someone providing a service to another business, right? So I then got really good and immersed in that world, and being able to write content across different types of services within B2B. Okay. But I stayed there, right? It becomes very difficult if then you then decide to go, well, I'm going to do that. And then I'm also going to go do medical. So now I'm going to write for doctors and dentists, and because now you have to learn all their world and all the terminologies and all the language and everything else, how they speak and how their customers want them to speak and all these things. So when I'm dealing with my fractional clients, I tend to keep them in the same industry, right? And I'll be frank with you, I've only been running this test since like end of last year. I launched with three test clients, right? So I had a VA company service that I used to write their content for them and do case studies for them, and then I was like, oh well, I'm going to test this. And I basically messaged the founder, the CEO, and said, are you interested in testing this with me, right? Do you need help with driving your marketing? And she said, yes. Okay, well, let's do a test for 3 months, right? And then I had another a company, or another, basically a friend of mine who we've known each other for years, and she's in the medical science world. So for her, she's in biotech, And now she's not a professional service, right? However, the business that she runs is a consulting business, okay, which is a service, right? And I'm having done consulting before. I felt that I could actually add value with that particular business. And then when you think about the way marketing works, a lot of the way you craft, understand a customer, how you craft a message, how you find channels to put it out to, how you connect with those people, and how you drive sort of call to actions and leads and sales. That whole philosophy is really the same, independent of industry, right? But I actually, there was a funny moment where I actually said to this friend, I said, I didn't, it took about a week, but I actually said to her, I feel like I'm not qualified to be your marketing person because I don't understand your industry. Because I looked at her website and looked at some of the things she was posting on LinkedIn, and I said, I'm reading this, and it just doesn't make sense to me, right? It's another language. And then we had a frank conversation around that. She said, "Look, I've observed you build this, accounting business for the last, 7 years. I've seen what you can do, and I believe that you have the skills to do it in my industry, right?" So that gave me the confidence to then work with her, and we went in with the understanding that I'm new to the industry. I have these skills that are valuable, right? And we're testing. It's an experiment, right? And it may not work, and we'll be okay with that. And we've got to make sure that we preserve our friendship, right? That's the risk of working with friends, right? So we were very clear on that. And a few, like last month, we literally had the review, the 6 month review together, and said, here's the things that are working, here are the things that are not working. Let's come back in January and map out, if she wants to continue, what that might look like, right? So that's yeah, long answer to your question, but I basically, and I also set it so I only have 1 day allocated to each client. So, and the way my service works is I give them up to 4 hours per week, right? And that's how I'm able to split things. But I try to avoid having like two clients on the same day from two different industries or two different, like it's just too much for my brain to handle. So I kind of like split my days in that way. And then I mentioned also that I'm working for an agency. So when I'm in my growth marketer agency mode, so with that particular agency focuses in the accounting tech world. So they work with a lot of software companies building for accounting firms. And so basically my week currently looks like 3 days of agency work, sometimes 3.5 days, and then I've got 1.5 days where I'm doing fractional work, and I've got two clients I'm working with as a fractional at the moment.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it seems like your days are pretty packed, but I mean, that all makes sense, especially like context switching is kind of like a big thing. And I think you kind of mentioned it earlier with like emails, that's like your context just switches there. And like having it set from like basically the less context switches you can do, it's like the better, basically.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of like shutting off all your notifications, turning off your phone, or whatever, getting off Slack and just going like heads down, let's work for 4 hours or whatever, with time blocking. And that's been a huge, so I'll give you a secret to my, like, the way I work
Mhm.
is there's a tool called Sunsama. Have you heard of this, Edwin?
Called what? Can you repeat that?
Sunsama. Sunsama.
No, I
Um,
haven't actually.
yeah, I'll share a link with you afterwards. But basically, that is my like it helps me plan my week and my day, and then it basically it just it's like an admin that helps me control and focus each day on what I need to be doing. Otherwise, yeah, I can get into this real like mess of here's 20 things I need to be doing, and I'm overwhelmed and I can't get anything done. So Sansama has been an amazing like tool to help me work through that stuff.
Okay. Talk about one last thing since we're almost out of time. But talking about tools, you mentioned AI. I was actually reading like your newsletter, and at the bottom it says, made with like Claude 2 and ChatGPT. Can you kind of touch on like you said like AI is going to replace like the lower level stuff, but then like the newsletter has some sort of like AI into it. What's your like if you mind sharing, right? Like how do you use AI in your work, either your newsletter, maybe your clients? Like how do you kind of like leverage that versus like because we all know it's not going to replace humans, not right now for content, but like how do you kind of like leverage it to kind of like I don't know move forward faster?
Yeah, that's a great question. basically the way I use it is we need to understand that language learning models, and that's what they are. They learn language and they repeat patterns, right? So they're not at the level now where they're thinking for themselves. I mean, the pure definition of artificial intelligence is that it can think for itself. Machines that can do that. Something like a ChatGPT doesn't think at all. All it's doing is you feed it some data, and then it basically regurgitates that, it processes that, and then it spits out patterns. Because if you say write a LinkedIn post for me, right, it's gonna pull from whatever data it's been given, and then it's going to try and like replicate that thing, right? So I like to view it as like a junior writer, like an assistant, a research assistant, a something, someone, if you want to call it that, that can, or a tool that can draft copy or content, right? And as I mentioned earlier, then I become me. I go in as the editor. So I'm going in going, okay, well, what's the actual narrative I want to put out there? How can I infuse personality, tone of voice, my human, if I'm writing for a brand, the uniqueness of the brand or the brand voice? How can I put that in there? Because the GBT or whatever tools you're using won't have that. It doesn't. It can't unless you've already fed it a database of 100 stories, that you've pulled out of your CEO or yourself, where you've written down like here's literally 100 of my life stories, and I'm feeding that into the AI. You won't know those things, right? So I get it to, like, I'll ask it to do things like give me an outline for a blog post on podcasting, and it will give me an outline, right? And then I'll say, okay, well, here are then I was like, if I like the outline, good. Draft, that blog post, right, and make it 2,000 words, right? So it will do that, and then from there, then I'm going into okay, and I may specify I want the tone of voice to be a certain way. Now, something that I've done, and I would recommend you do if you're using it, is to get very clear on what your tone of voice is and how do you stylistically write things, right? So you can actually a nice thing you can do with GPT specifically, if you have Plus, which is the paid version, is you can actually say you can give it 3 articles that you've published on your website, on your blog, or somewhere online, or maybe you've got them in Google Docs and you just copy and paste, or you can even upload PDFs and you can read it and you can say, based on these links or this data I'm giving you, can you define the tone of voice and create a style guide, a style guide for a writer, right? And it will actually then unpack everything and go, well, you write in these sentences and you use these kind of words and blah 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 blah, and you check that, and if you like, and if it's accurate enough for you, and you go, okay, that's pretty good. You can say, well, save that, and I want you to now write an article on X Y Z topic using that tone of voice, right? So then you would then, so you're guiding it, right? You're basically, always think of it like if I was to train you and you were sitting right next to me, Edwin, and I'm saying, okay, watch me write this blog post, and as I'm writing it, I'm explaining to you like this is how I use characters and this is how I write sentences and this whatever it may be. It's doing that step, right? But it does it in like seconds, okay? And then from there, it's easy to generate the content, and but I don't just copy and paste and away we go. So I basically then take that, I put it into a Google Doc, I run Grammarly, which is another favorite tool of mine, which is used to check grammar and spelling and these kind of things. And it also can check for Australian versus US versus UK English, right? So basically, because one of the problems for me being in Australia is GPT by default writes in a US language, right? So a lot of the phrases that it uses and the words in the spelling that it uses is US centric. And for all my clients, they're all Australians or in the UK. So I need to change, that around, and make sure that, that's fixed. So I use it to draft, to brainstorm, to sort of like nut out ideas. And then I actually go in and clean it up before and edit, and tweak before it goes out.
Okay, I mean that makes a lot of sense actually. Like I never even considered like uploading like my own stuff into it. I think I was stuck with what a lot of people are like okay, in the prompt to say okay, your tone is casual, non-academic tone. That's what I've kind of just been doing, just typing that stuff out, and it kind of works, but not really. But I think what you mentioned, like uploading your own docs and having that kind of like in this knowledge base, that is probably much better than just saying, "Oh yeah, like casual voice." That doesn't
Yeah,
really tell me much.
yeah, that's yeah. This will take it a whole other level up, and you could even go like if you have any favorite writers, for example, like you maybe you read like maybe you like Tim Ferriss and the way he writes his books, or maybe you like someone else, and you basically can take some of their chapters and just copy some of the maybe the first chapter, right, or even the intro, and just copy the text, put it into GPT, and say summarize, like decode this, create a tone of voice style guide based on this text, right? So then you will actually unpack how that writer writes, okay, and the style and tone that they use, right? So if you are particularly inspired by a certain writer, or writers, you can then use that for your own writing. That will actually help you improve as a writer too, because you're like, oh, that's what they're doing. They're actually using sentences in this way, or they're using these metaphors, or they're using these things. And then you can actually, this is very helpful for brands, right? When you're working with brands, because the biggest challenge that brands have with hiring copywriters or content writers is the biggest worry that they have usually is, can you nail the tone of voice, right? If I outsource to someone else, right? Does that work, right? And so, and one of the things that I learned as a copywriter was, oh, well, what we need to do is actually let's get 10 podcast recordings that you've done, or talks you've given, or pieces that you've put out there, you've written already, and then we'll use that as a guide to create your tone of voice guide, and then I can give that to my writers, or I can use it for myself. In this case, I'm giving it to my AI writer, right? Giving it to them and going, okay, well, here's the tone of voice. Can you unpack that? Let's save that, and you can literally prompt GPT to say, save this as Edwin tone of voice, right? And it will remember that. It was like, okay, Edwin tone, and then say, can you recall? And I always check like after 4 or 5 pieces of content I produce with it, I always recheck and say, GPT, can you confirm what Edwin tone of voice is? And then it'll dump it out again, and I'm checking that it's still accurate. Because sometimes it changes it. So I check it, I go, okay, that's correct, or no, you're missing this, GPT. Can you actually add this part of it? These things to it, because Edwin would never say something like game changer, right? Like, so that's how you kind of prompt the tone of voice within the AI.
That was, I feel there's like a lot of gold nuggets there, like especially obviously like uploading stuff there, brand tone, they're like they're kind of like corpus of words that they use and that they don't use as well. Like that is like really like valuable stuff. However, I think we are at time though. I mean, thank you so much. I would love to have you back on like even in the future. Like I think I literally have like a massive list of questions I didn't even get to ask because you have like so much that's like going on and like you're really impressive.
Thanks,
Yeah,
man.
like
Yeah, more than happy to do so. We will have to do a version 2, and yeah, happy to join you again. It's been fun.
awesome, awesome. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for the Pathmakers podcast. Come and join me on the next episode, and thank you for watching.